Hello, my name is Tara Tui, and this is my final assignment for 690 Capstone with Tanner Clark. I figured before diving into my final capstone assignment, my final paper, I would give you a little bit of an introduction as to who I am and a little bit about my experience, not only at Touro University, but also with my last 12 months in my practicum. Again, my name is Tara. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I spent the last 12 months at two different practicum sites in the Chicagoland area. I started my first practicum at Compass Health Center in Chicago, Illinois, which is a partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient program. I worked in the young child unit, so that involved working with kids ages from 5 to 10, and I was a family therapist intern. So I learned so much there, and I really took a lot of valuable information with me while I was at that site. Alongside that site, this was about halfway into my practicum experience. I actually obtained another site, and this was Arden Shore Child and Family Services. This is in the North Chicago area. This is a community mental health center, so it's a little bit different for partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient, but I found it extremely valuable. I loved my time there. I learned so much as a clinician, and I felt like in my role as an intern at the community mental health center, I was really able to apply a lot of the concepts that I learned within practicum regarding all the different modalities of therapy, interventions, and whatnot. So that's where I've been for the last 12 months. I've learned an awful lot, not only through the practicum experiences that I've had through Touro University, working alongside the cohorts and the other students who attend the college, but also with my supervisors at practicum sites themselves. So that's kind of where I've been at for the past 12 months. I've been really, really, really happy with my experience. And I figured now that you have a little bit of a background about who I am and what I've been doing, I can dive into my paper and my therapeutic modality of choice. So, again, um, there's a lot of trial and error through the work that I did, not only at Compass Health Center, the partial hospitalization, but also the community mental health center, specifically when it came to finding out what kind of therapeutic model suited me the best. I definitely went through solution focused therapy, emotion focused, structural family therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, dialectical behavioral therapies. Um, and they were all used for good reason, for different reasons. For example, at the partial hospitalization program, we used a lot of CBT, a lot of DBT, um, and more of like a short-term behavioral approach to therapy just due to the crisis-like nature of where we were. Um, when I moved on to community mental health, I felt like I was able to kind of find my groove more as a therapist. Just because of the nature of the work, we saw our clients once a week. I feel like in general, a lot of MFT modalities were kind of formulated for private practice, not even community mental health, aside from structural family therapy. So I felt like that was a lot closer than partial hospitalization, so I was able to use a lot more of those modalities. But the one that really stuck with me was narrative therapy, and I can kind of get into that in my paper. So one thing that I really like about narrative therapy is that reality is storied and that there are dominant discourses in society in which, as individuals, we kind of form narratives on our own lives based off of what some of those dominant discourses are. So I believe as a clinician that there's a lot of power in language, and reauthoring that language could prove to be very valuable for our clients depending on their situations. Um, some of the major concepts of narrative therapy include, like I said, language, also deconstructing societal influences. So, kind of what I talked about with those dominant discourses, storytelling and making meaning. I think, especially with trauma victims, trauma survivors, um, kind of building a new narrative that kind of helps these victims take their power back and take more of like a survivor attitude towards their traumas. I think that could be very advantageous. I also think that externalizing the problem is a really healthy way to look at things. Um, it makes me think about a book that I read called Choose Wonder Over Worry by Amber Ray. She talked about how feelings a long time ago, feelings like with the ancient Greeks, they were viewed as visitors. And when these feelings would come, um, it was kind of viewed as okay, like for example, anger's here for me. Like what is the message that anger is trying to bring me? Or anxiety has come. Like what's the message that anxiety is trying to bring me? I think that's a really healthy way to look at emotions, but not only emotions, but a lot of the struggles that clients deal with in day-to-day life. I think um, kind of externalizing the problem in that way can be really healthy. So, yeah, that's a bit about narrative therapy. Moving on. So, while working with diverse clients, I know the second question of our paper was how will you use your personal therapeutic model of choice when working with diverse clients who might have different ideas, opinions, and experiences than you're accustomed to? So, I grew up in a northern suburb of Chicago that was considered pretty wealthy and affluent, predominantly white area. And when I worked in community mental health, that couldn't have been further from my experience growing up. So I really had to hone in on cultural attunement, understanding different cultures and their values, and how that influences therapy and the entire trajectory of therapy and the therapeutic process. So I think, especially as a narrative therapist, understanding societal discourses as it pertains to marginalization and racism and how that affects clients as it is, let alone in regards to their issue, if it does pertain to their issue. So, I think, especially in the therapy room, respect is very important on both ends, especially when you're working with clients who have different worldviews from you, have different experiences and opinions. Respect is kind of at the basis of all of that. Um, yeah. So, I think it's really important to emphasize using a collaborative dialogue since in narrative therapy, the therapist is kind of the co-author, the editor of the client's story. So just kind of remembering that. Um, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip forward to my concrete example of working with a client whose experience differed than my own. I counseled a client who was 20 years older than me, came from a completely different background, Hispanic, low income, different socioeconomic status, um, poorly educated, and I had a very different experience from that. So I think really honing in on cultural attunement in all of this was really important, not only with her, but with every single client that I worked in community mental health. It was a very eye-opening experience, and I think it's going to make me a better clinician overall in whichever endeavor I choose. Um, but this client had come from an abusive marriage of 20 years. Her self esteem was really broken, and she just had filed for divorce. And coming to therapy, when we started services together, she was crying each and every session for about 2.5 sessions. But after implementing our therapeutic goals, beginning to externalize the problem, shaping her language, and kind of deconstructing not only societal discourses and narratives, but also within her own family and her ex-partner's own family, she was able to rebuild her self-esteem, rebuild her relationship with her children, and really lean on resources that she didn't have the confidence to do so before. And of course, I attribute that to her and her hard work, but also with the modalities that we used in narrative therapy. We did a lot of letter writing, we positive affirmations, and I think language kind of coincides with that. And even, you know, in regards to cultural attunement, kind of leaning on helping her lean on her spiritual resources as well. And as a clinician, I definitely had to kind of adjust for that. Um, Again, in conclusion, narrative therapy is my model of choice. I found it to be really effective with a lot of the clients that I worked with. I plan on continuing to use that modality with clients as it suits. And yeah, I think that a lot could be said about externalizing the problem, whichever the problem is. I think that not everything is figure outable, but we can do the best that we can with the resources that we have, and language is a lot of that. So thank you so much for listening.